Live your life, boy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Conspiracy Farm, where we don't start the conspiracies, we just add the water. And now, your host of the most state-of-the-art, most informed podcast on the interweb, I present to you Pat Miletich and Jeffrey Wilson. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for war?
Yeah, rear naked choke a Cocker Spaniel, bro. You know what I'm saying?
Bro.
Change the neighborhood up.
Conspiracy Farm. Go. Check it out.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Conspiracy Farm, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, Jeffrey Wilson, the brains of the operation. How are you, Jeff?
I am doing very well, man. Every single day above ground's a good day, man. I'm blessed and enjoying this year of our Lord 2025, and it's good to be back with you, and I'm really stoked to chop it up with our guest today.
Yeah, it's been quite a while since we've done an episode. I mean, how long has it been? Have you checked on that?
Well, we've been back a few times. We've had those fighters that have multiple retirement matches. Not that we retired, but we kind of came and went a few times. It wasn't too long ago, maybe 2-3 months ago. But we're all very busy, and I think we said in that last episode we're not going to be as regular as we usually were. But when we have time, we want to dip back in here and chop it up.
Give people updates, so to speak, right?
For sure. And today I think is a really, really important conversation, and no better person to have it with than our boy Nick.
Yeah, so having said that, Jeff, I'll add that our guest today is Nick Spohn. Nick and I have known each other for many, many years, trained at my facility, was a professional athlete, professional fighter, former wrestler at Purdue University, master's degree in agriculture finance, but also one of the world's top mindset coaches, also world-class hypnotist. And I know how good he is because he's the only guy I've ever let hypnotize me, and it has somewhat worked. And so Nick does many other things. He organizes huge events for mindset and hypnosis and works with many, other hypnotists to help them get better at what they do. So Nick's a very knowledgeable guy and has insight that I think will help a lot of people. So welcome, Nick.
Thanks for having me. And Pat is sitting right next to me in my studio, so it's nice to do something live here. And I'm excited for our conversation today.
Well, Nick, you are returning. Like I said, this is your second or third, I forget, but you're no stranger to the farm. So, and like I said, I think this is a very worthy conversation, man, on so many different levels. I mean, I've wanted to do something like this on either this show or my show, kind of addressing men's mental health. It's kind of somewhat stigmatized, especially for men. I mean, people dealing with mental health, as we see it every day manifest, it's throughout our society. But men's mental health, for some reason, seems to be a tougher obstacle to kind of tackle because men, of course, are supposed to have it all locked down at all times. And we at least pretend like we do sometimes, but oftentimes that is a facade. And I want to talk today, between me, you, Pat, and everybody who's listening, we're all going through stuff. So I think having kind of someone like Nick's insight to help us navigate these waters and kind of addressing the notion, especially for men, it's okay to not be okay. You just don't want to stay there.
Yeah, and I think, I've got a few notes here. We can go wherever direction you want, but one thing to consider is the incarceration rate for men is much higher. Suicide rates are much higher. I mean, the mental health measurements, I think by all standards, are worse for men than for women. And some of that may be because we believe we have to be the providers. We have to have it together. Right. We have to, kind of like we're a lone wolf in ways. And if we're not performing to the level that our women in our society expect, we almost don't want other people to know that. Versus women, I think, have a built-in mechanism where they connect over problems. And that's a little bit of an evolutionary thing that they can have a problem and go share it. And with men, it's like this belief that I have to figure it out and I have to bring the answers back to my family and my tribe. And it gets pressureful, and it gets a little bit lonely too, right?
Without a doubt. I mean, that is a huge pressure because we're supposed to be the tip of the spear, the captain of the ship, and we're not supposed to exhibit or show any chinks in the armor. And like you said, if we do exhibit or portray these chinks in the armor, somehow that makes us weak. And I think that's a huge part of men's, mental awareness or kind of mental health is we don't like talking about shit. You know what I mean? On a multitude of reasons for the ones I just mentioned. But for like me personally, it's like I almost, like there's 8 billion of us. We're all going through some shit. So one of the reasons why me personally, I could just testify about myself, why I don't like talking to people about my shit, because it's like, it almost seems selfish. Like, hey, I know you're going through something too, but let me tell you about my shit, because somehow my shit's more important. And then we wind up.
And women don't have that, right, Jeffrey? Like they don't have that belief that I need to keep this to myself and it's selfish to share it.
Right. I mean, I think that's, kind of we're the conquerors, if you will, and women kind of are the nurturers. And I think you're right. They kind of click with each other when it comes to talking about their problems, et cetera. But I mean, I think we kind of hit the nail on the head. And I think I want to talk about that, and Pat, talk about your experiences or whatever. And I mean, obviously, guys, you can't chime in, but do you guys relate to what I'm saying? We kind of just keep it to ourselves and we don't talk about shit. Hey, honey, how you doing? Fine. Hey, Jeff, how you doing? Fine. Hey, Pat, how you doing? Fine. We always hit him with the fine. And my rationale is, I'm not going to burden you with my shit, because I know you're going through shit too. So that sucks, because we wind up keeping it to ourselves. But I do have certain outlets, friends, et cetera, Pat and other good friends. But a lot of men don't. We kind of just keep it to ourselves, oftentimes to our own detriment.
Yeah, when we look at just the last 5 years, not to mention what was going on before, leading up to, we'll call them the COVID years, the world was already getting very squirrely. And so if you feel that you're a true father, you love your children, you want to provide for them financially, you want to protect them, it's just the world is so crazy now and turned upside down that a lot of people don't even know where to begin besides just, holding down that 9 to 5 and having somewhat of a normal life and watching the news at night and seeing the sound bites and getting messed with mentally that way. And just so many things going on in society trying to turn things upside down when people just want to live their life and pay their bills and take care of their kids and take them to baseball practice.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I always say it's a chore and a discipline staying sane in an insane world.
Well, and that's the thing is, Ronald Reagan did away with, during his administration, they did away with a lot of the insane asylums. But I thought for years, just by the way I viewed the world from my life experiences as a child growing up, that I was noticing at a very early age that things didn't make sense. It didn't add up to me, right? So I think it was in my 20s, I started going, wait a minute. A lot of the people in the insane asylums probably saw the world the way it actually is instead of the way they want you to see it, right? The programming that they throw out there. And they just, they went sideways, right? And is it Dick Gregory, is that his name, that talked about, once you put on the glasses, you can never take them off. You can't make other people wear them. They won't see the world the way you do. And that's just the way it is. And so that's kind of the way that I honestly looked at that.
And Nick, I mean, to chime in on this too, because I found this very poignant. It was one of the JRE clips. He had some young lady on who was an author. I forget the name of the book was, but Joe had said it was became this kind of poignant thing for him. And Pat, I'm going to elaborate how it affected me, but she talked about rumination. And particularly with us doing the farm, or people who are in this world of trying to figure out the truth and tell people the truth, this rumination and this hyper focusing on shit that you can't necessarily control, and how it can affect your mood and your kind of internal equanimity. And I remember specifically, Pat, and I know you remember, when after we did a show, and regardless of what anybody thinks about the veracity of what she was saying, we had a guest by the name of Fiona Barnett talking about her just systematic satanic ritual abuse that she went through, and at the end of it, it was just so fucking heavy. And Pat I had already been doing episode after episode about all this heavy shit, and I was just like, brother, we got to switch this up, man. I mean, it was already taking a toll, but that's kind of when we started doing everything combat, something a little bit more light, because life is a fight, overcoming obstacles, etc. But this notion of rumination, and this guest on JRE was talking about, that's one of the first kind of signs of depression, if you will, of focusing and hyper-focusing on these things that you can't necessarily control, but then it winds up taking you off your square, your spiritual, your internal equanimity. Nick, does that sound...
Yes. So I have a list here of some topics I wanted to go over to really set the men in particular up, and really anybody up, for mental health success. And so one of those is frames of mind. And so this kind of segues into our start here, that there's a couple frames of mind and belief and focus systems that create success or that create failure and problems with mental health. And so when you focus on the first one I'm going to go over is the problem frame versus the outcome frame. So when you spend all your time focusing on the problems, you're going to feel that. You're going to feel the weight of those problems. It's great to be aware of the problem and then to shift your focus into the outcome, to shift your focus into the solution, to shift your focus into the things that you can control. And I've seen people that go down the conspiracy road, they just live in that state of everyone's out to get us and I have no control over anything.
Right.
And when your nervous system doesn't believe it can control a situation, it's going to shut down to save energy. Why would you expend energy in a system where you can't have an effect? And so I think most depression, I'm not going to say all, because there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of possibilities, but a lot of depression comes from the frame of mind that I can't have an effect in this situation. So the whole nervous system shuts down, waiting for a time where your efforts will matter. And so that problem frame, outcome frame is kind of the start. Does that help?
Yeah, and honestly, I'm glad you gave that clarification, because I always, without any kind of diagnosis or deeper understanding, I always thought it kind of put the nervous system into overdrive, especially like the limbic system. I think the limbic system is the one that governs like the fight or flight. So you're constantly on in this fight or flight mode, waiting for the worst thing to happen, or you know what I'm saying? What I'm saying, like that hyper elevation of that fight or flight mode.
Absolutely. So that's kind of the first frame, and we'll stick with this frames in mind here for a minute, Jeffrey. But the other one is failure versus feedback. So if you live and you focus on your failures, you're going to feel the weight of those failures and you're going to feel like a failure. But everybody fails. All failure is only information and it's feedback. And so when you can switch from looking at things as failure to looking at them as feedback, your whole perspective changes and your state of mind, your physical being, and emotions will change as well. And then we can always focus on what we don't have, or we can focus on what we do have. How many billionaires are out there depressed because they're focused on the woman they don't have, or the one thing they don't have. And then there's poor people out there who live in a state of gratitude and joy because they're focused on the things they have. So these are a few frames of mind that set us up for success.
Interesting. I try to do that, man. As much as we want things to be going our way, like I have jokingly say every day, every day above ground's a good day, man. We woke up today. A lot of people didn't. So when we start tripping about what we don't have, man, put it in perspective, because we have way more than we don't have.
Yeah, and I think a lot to be said in terms of what we control and what we cannot control. And knowing the difference. But you and I, Jeff, were doing, by any standards, we had a very successful show. But then when I sat back and I did the math on it, I thought we were making a huge impact, which I think we changed a lot of lives. There was a lot of people that thanked us for the information that we gave them over all the years. So we did change some lives for the better. They were aware of the things that were coming down the pipe, things like that. But when I did the math and I thought, okay, we've had 5 million listeners and there's 8 billion people on the planet. How much of a dent are we making? We are moving consciousness somewhat, with the things that we're saying and the things that we're revealing to people. But overall, there was so much stress and there were so many arrows shot at us about, tinfoil hat stuff and ridiculous things by people who, had never done any research, that eventually that stuff starts taking a toll, especially like you talked about, some of the level of darkness that we had to cover. Yeah. And it certainly affected me.
Yeah. Without a doubt. And I think, I don't do the victory laps or the I told you so type stuff, but I think what we did served a purpose, and other shows like ours served a purpose, because whether it was 1 or 10 trillion people that we talked to or we affected, you can't change anything unless you recognize there's something to change. So hopefully we brought some level of awareness that something's going on, that again, we talked about so many things that wound up coming true and are still coming true. That's why I always say, the archives that we have, we stand by them because we're still seeing it unfold to this day. But, we talked about, the pre-show, how crazy this was specifically during COVID. I mean, that was kind of the height of us in the show because we were just at home cranking out episodes. But, I mean, you look at the statistics, the suicides, the domestic violence, people were beating their siblings, their loved ones, their pets, emergency room visits, and again, suicides, overdoses, all of this through the roof, man. And I think we're still seeing the ripple effect of that to some degree. Have we fully quantified, Nicholas, in your opinion, how much of a toll psychologically COVID took on us, even though it was, almost half a decade ago now?
Yeah, I don't know that we can ever really measure that, or I don't know that it would even be useful to. I think, at the end of the day, what I say hypnosis is focus and expectation. And so Pat and I we were together working with a few peers on a project we have, and I had everybody put their hand on the table and focus on the experience of their hand being stuck to the table. And it wasn't long until everybody had that experience. And so COVID was just shifting people's focus and expectation to fear and disease and all of the worst scenarios. And so people, as they focused on it and expected it, they felt it, and then they manifested it. I had friends that would call me and say, hey man, I think I've got this COVID thing. And they would go over all these symptoms that they heard on the news. And I'd be like, all right, hold on, just close your eyes for a minute. And I would hypnotize them, and their symptoms would go away because they were hallucinating or imagining these things. I'm not saying that was always the case, but it's certainly the power of suggestion. And so
you were doing this over the phone?
Yeah,
Damn.
for sure. So as we can shift people's focus and expectation, they feel different things. And as they feel different things, they tend to manifest different things, and they perceive the world differently. So all I'm doing, Jeffrey, is I'm having conversations where I'm shifting people's focus and expectations away from the problems into what they want.
Yeah. No, I was going to add to that was had a conversation with Theo Fleury, former NHL All-Star and gold medalist in the Olympics, Canadian gentleman who's a good friend of mine. And he's got a video out there. People can look him up on Twitter where he talks about, because he was so severely abused as a child, that the tactics and techniques used by the way the media was programmed and all the medical professionals, that it literally was a parallel to all the techniques used by someone who would abuse a child. So the gaslighting, the back and forth, the destabilization of never being able to get your footing, mask, no mask, lockdown, no lockdown, constant manipulation, things like that it caused him a lot of problems. I mean, he was very aggressive on defending Canadians' rights, all of that. And I experienced the same thing because of my childhood. And not only that, I had done, a lot of research, as you have, but it was 25 years ago. I was researching vaccines and finding no validity to any vaccines at all to begin with, let alone mRNA gene editing,
right?
Technology that's going to alter human beings' DNA and genetics. So, think about it, Jeff, the different types of people that we have interviewed over the years, the military intelligence folks, the special forces guys, the scientists, the economists, so you and I were already seeing, okay, this is going to give plausible deniability to the bankers to print trillions of dollars to destabilize the dollar and global currencies, right, to move on to a new system. And we knew that was coming after the 2008 housing crisis.
Right.
We said, this has got to be the last one before the big one. They've set the stage, right? Excuse me. So that, and on top of that, I never had it published. I wish I would have. The book that I wrote, Operation Green Tip, that had, once there was a financial collapse, that people were forced to get nanotechnology vaccines to be able to get paid at work, to be able to pay their bills, to be able to buy groceries, all those types of things. So we saw this coming for so long that the signs were so clear as it approached that you and I were both, in your words, sounding the horns of Gundar, right?
We were.
So let's go back to some strategies for people, because I think your listeners are familiar that all this stuff is going on, right? So how do we keep in a good frame of mind?
Yes.
Amid all of that. So we kind of went over some of those frames already. We went over that hypnosis is really just focus and expectation. So you can shift your focus and expectation, and feel differently about things. I think another thing to observe, and certainly something I got better at during COVID, was becoming the observer of your thoughts and emotions and your beliefs without identifying with them. So, in the English language, we say things like, I am depressed, or I am anxious, or I have anxiety. In the Spanish language, it's the estar verb, which is a temporary, like, I'm experiencing depression. It's something that comes and goes. It's not an identity. And so the whole point of meditation, which has been taught for thousands and thousands of years across all disciplines, is to observe the thought that comes up, whether it's fear, anxiety, depression, being horny, being joyful, whatever it is, like observing that thought and feeling and knowing that it's temporary and it's not you. And I think when we can do that, we start to have power over our responses instead of our responses owning us.
Do you think I think that's very important, like the language and the linguistics of what we use and the narrative we tell ourselves. What's the difference? Is that a cultural difference from, like, something more European or in like different regions of the world? Because I think that's hugely important. Like, when we, like Bruce Lee said, when we solidify that which was once fluid, is that something that's just endemic to us over here?
There's certain aspects of it in the Spanish language as well, but I think English, the language, has a lot of viruses in it and a lot of incongruencies that make it difficult or give double meanings to our nervous system. And that's one of those that can catch people up if they're not careful with it. But even saying things like I have one of my meditation teachers always says things like, oh, the body is tired, or the body needs stretched. And he doesn't say my body or I need to go stretch, right? Because he's not identifying with the body. It's a vehicle. You don't say I'm gonna, like, you don't identify your car as you. It's just a vehicle you use.
Right.
And so
right.
our body is the vehicle to carry out our mission or the things we want to do and experience in life.
I have a friend who had cancer, but when they got diagnosed, there was never, ever, ever did he ever say, I have cancer. It was like, I'm experiencing, it was the same thing. He never took ownership of it, and he wound up beating it. And I can't quantify it, but I think that's probably a huge portion of how he did beat it, because he never identified it and took it on as his. It was something he was just experiencing temporarily.
Love that. Love it.
Well, and something I think is huge, and this is all part of this conversation, and Pat, you and I were kind of talking about it yesterday. I think people have heard, I think it's the Jesuits or whatever, I hear the term, you give me your kid from 0 to 7, I have them for life. I think that's basically drilling down on this understanding of whatever we had downloaded from 0 to 7 is the operating system in our unconscious that we play out for the rest of our lives. Is there validity to that?
Well, yes and no. So 100% that tends to be the driving force in most people's lives, is how they learn to get love, how they learn to get approval, how they learn to prevent themselves from getting in trouble as a child, affects the whole life. Now, the thing with hypnosis and neuro-linguistic programming and meditation is you can, just like you relearned it, or just like you learned it as a child,
right,
you can relearn new strategies really easily. Like I do this all the time, where I can help somebody change what something means or their emotional response to something, often in minutes, because just like when you touch a hot stove as a child, you do it once and you learn. Well, it's the same way, like change doesn't take time. You don't have to touch it 100 times to get it.
Right.
Just like you don't have to learn something 100 times to get it. You just have to have the right leverage in a state of subconscious openness, and that whole meaning and program and system can change literally in minutes.
Is that not necessarily one side? Well, is it essential for certain habits, behaviors, cycles to change? Do you have to do that, rewrite, reprogram that unconscious to then change that those behaviors that you're not wanting to do anymore?
It certainly helps. I think another way that people can go about it is to create a new vision or identity for the person they want to be. And Pat and I have talked about this when he was chasing the world title, is he would visualize himself as a world champion. To become like that of a world champion. And I think when you have that purpose and that vision for yourself, I mean, purpose is, especially for men, like one of our driving forces. And if men don't have a purpose, they often fall into substance abuse, feeling bad for themselves, trying to find pleasure in the moment instead of dedicating themselves to growth, devoting themselves to something greater. And that's where we get fulfillment, right? Is that purpose. And that purpose is what drives us to overcome some of those bad habits. And as we create the new vision for ourselves, we grow out of those things that used to hold us back.
But it's one of those, you have to want it, right? It's not something, it's not going to come to you. You have to kind of put the work in.
Yeah, and I think it comes down, I'll just jump in, that it has to get to a point that you're sick of yourself. And that would be your rock bottom.
Right.
And searching for answers. And certainly I've been through that process and searching for answers on why I had anxiety, why I had depression, all these different things. I talked to several experts, even neurological experts, on what was going on with my nervous system, and nobody ever gave me answers. And through, Dr. Will Spencer resetting my nervous system, thank God, it allowed me to calm down enough for Nick to be able to do hypnosis on me. And, the other work that I was putting in other ways, to be able to come to a different understanding where I didn't have to self-medicate with alcohol just to be able to fall asleep at night. Because I would stay awake and my mind would not shut off. And I know that experience that a lot of people are going through. And just a couple of weeks ago, Nick and I were coming out of the coffee shop or going into the coffee shop. We've been doing a lot of work together on a project. But anyway, I looked up and the sky was full of chemtrails, right? A lot of people don't recognize them, don't see them as a problem because they haven't done any research. That's fine. But when I would look up, I'd say, and it made me a little mad because they were very active that day. And Nick looked at me and he goes, just imagine how much opportunity they're providing for what we're doing to heal soil and to help people, which we know the solutions for people to get the heavy metals and the synthetics out of the body. We know how to fix the soil. We know how to do all of that. We have the programs to fix it. And when he switched my mindset on the amount of opportunity that these activities were providing for me and him and other people that are working with us, it totally changed my mindset, because I was thinking I should be thanking them. I should absolutely be thanking them for doing the things that they're doing and toxifying the environment. And because we know the answers, and there's going to be a lot of people out there that want the solutions who are going to be willing to pay us to do that.
And like what Nick was saying, it truly comes down to something as basic as the mindset and your perspective and how you see it. You see it as an opportunity as opposed to, like I say, it's happening like for you, not to you kind of thing.
Yeah. And Jeffrey, this is a fundamental belief for me that kind of shapes my entire life. And I think it gives me a lot of power. And it's really that, as above, so below, meaning that however deep a problem goes, there's always an equal and opposite resource for a solution. Napoleon Hill says in Outwitting the Devil that every setback or failure carries with it the seed of an equal or greater opportunity. So I just believe that there's always an equal or greater opportunity to every single problem. And when you view the world with that frame, you see positive, you see opportunities, you see resources, where most people living in fear are literally blinding themselves to those things.
Yeah. I forget who it was. Literally this morning, it was some musician, a younger guy. Really, he was pretty dope. Actually, he was playing guitar, and he was just talking about success. He's like, everyone just sees the success, but he's like, dude, in order for me to be this huge star, I fucking failed over and over and over again, but nobody saw that. And even when I would kind of call fights, but you can extrapolate it to life. And you said this earlier, and you just alluded to it again. There are no failures, man. Only opportunities to learn. And I think when you start seeing it that way, it just changes everything. And I think a lot of people get stuck in, fuck, I failed. And almost like you were saying, they identify themselves as their failures as opposed to seeing these things as stepping stones to the bigger shit that they really do want. It just, it's going to take some tweaking. Adjust this. It's not a failure. It's not a mistake. It's just an opportunity for you to adjust, make a necessary adjustment to keep it moving.
Yeah, totally. And this kind of segues into another, I think, mental health stepping stone is the idea that growth is probably one of the main or only reasons that we're here on earth. And so growth is learning, and it's stepping out of your comfort zone and exposing yourself to opportunities where that failure is there. You know, if Pat never took a fight that you know, if he never took a fight that scared him, he never would have won a world title. He would have stayed safe and played small.
Yeah.
And if you never get on the phone and make sales calls and overcome your sales resistance, you never really build a business. And if you never put that product out there or attempt something that is that's challenging or that makes your stomach drop, you never grow. And I think what makes us feel alive, and this is one of the things I coach people on, is whatever brings you like fear and excitement at the same time is probably what you should be focusing on. That's probably your area of growth.
And that's a huge obstacle for a lot of people getting out of that comfort zone, because I mean, just in the nature of the term, we're comfortable. We're very, very, it's easy to stay comfortable, but to challenge yourself and to get out of that comfort zone, it's a difficult obstacle for a lot of people for, the obvious reasons. They're comfortable.
And most of the time, there's like a body of water in front of us that we feel like we have to jump in and we're going to sink. And really you jump in and you realize it's 2 inches deep and it's not as bad as you thought. It just like it's not the thing that's scary. It's the idea of the thing that's scary to us, right? Like it's not making a sales call that's scary. It's how we understand and think about making the sales call that scares us. And once you push yourself past that thing, you're free from the fear of it forever.
It's kind of like people like, man, once I get to the gym, I'm good. But getting to the gym is really the obstacle. But I love this. It's a line from Joseph Campbell, who I'm a big fan of. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. And that's whole facts right there, man. That's whole facts.
And it's what leads to a fulfilling life, is overcoming those things and living in that rush of, am I going to make it or not? Am I going to fail massively or have this incredible story? And I think that makes us feel alive for sure.
It does. So I hope, this conversation hopefully wakes people up as far as, don't have this fatalistic mentality of, if things just happen to be shitty right now, this too shall pass. It don't have to have this fatalistic, deterministic, it's always going to be bad because it's been bad. Embrace some of these tools, Nick, and we're talking about, man. Challenge yourself. Get off the porch. Get into that cave that you fear to slay the fucking dragon, man.
And one of my NLP mentors used to say this. He would say, life is way too important to take seriously.
I like that.
When you live in a playful state, you're just better at everything. You see things more clearly. You're more creative. And so I think that's a good frame of mind to approach things in. And look, life is temporary. We probably do it many, many times. I just kind of view it as a video game. I'm out here beating bosses and upgrading and, my skills and my strengths and meeting some other players. And most of the players in the system are NPCs. So I don't really take them that seriously. And that's kind of a mental framework I use to make things seem easier.
I love that. Beating bosses and upgrading, slaying that dragon and getting the princess, man. So, what would you, I guess you kind of alluded to it, but like, what would you recommend to dudes out there who are just, hey, are you cool, man? I'm fine, who just don't want to talk about it. And it's always, I'm fine, and are scared to kind of broach the subject. Cause like I said, don't want to put that burden onto other people. And then just, it's, I don't know.
You mean if I met somebody that was kind of in that state that says they're fine, but not necessarily?
That's a lot of us out here, man. What would you recommend as tools to, like, it's okay to not be okay. Talk to somebody, man. Even if it's, whoever, just get it off your chest. Don't just, because then it winds up you getting into that, the self-medication or just bearing it, the workaholics. And then this gets into obviously the cortisol level and all this other shit. So it's like getting it off your chest is very therapeutic and beneficial, but some of us are just scared to do it.
Yeah, I think it's being present. Generally, you can read somebody and know what they're going through. Like I was at the Y yesterday, sitting in the sauna, and there was one kid that walked in and he was all slumped over, and you could just tell he didn't carry himself with confidence. And then the next kid walked in and he was like, he was posturing, right? He was pulling his stomach in and like looking down and checking himself out. And he wanted to make sure he looked good for everybody. And so you can kind of read that in people and know, oh, this guy is insecure. He's trying to show everybody that he's tough. And this other guy's, he's playing small in life. He's not stepping out there. And so for me, it's asking questions of those people to see where they are and direct their focus. Like, hey man, what are you excited about right now? What lights you up? And you can ask that question to people and see their body language change, their energy level change, because you tap into their values and different parts of their nervous system that start to put them in a resourceful state. And one of the most important questions is, because people, they'll talk a lot about problems. And one of the most important things to do is just direct people to like, okay, I understand that problem, but what do you want? Like, what are you working towards? What would excite you for how this works out? And directing people into the end state and taking their mind into what could happen and what they could become. And you'll watch them, their state change, their body language change, their beliefs in that moment can change. It's pretty cool.
I was going to say that's got to be pretty awesome. I call people like you altruistic agents of alchemy, right? You care a lot about people and you're not transmuting things from, lead into gold, but you're transmuting and you're transforming the quality of people's lives and their conscious state. So I think the line of work you're in, man, it's got to be awesome to watch that kind of transformation happen. But in the work you do, I mean, specifically men, what do you see as kind of the obstacle, or not necessarily the excuse necessarily, but the obstacle for men in embracing, getting on top of their mental health?
One of the big ones, and this isn't just for men, it's really everybody, but I would say is internal conflicts. And what I mean by that is like, we all kind of have this symphony of players in our mind, right? We've got the tough guy, we've got the victim, we've got the charismatic person, we've got the one that's insecure, and all these different parts of us. And they all have different goals and objectives. And even like I was talking to you about being at the Y in the sauna, there was this guy I was talking to, and he wanted to quit smoking weed. And so I kind of told him I was a hypnotist, and that's where he brought it up.
Wait a minute, you kind of told him?
No, I told him I was a hypnotist. Well, I told the other guy I was a hypnotist. So he was like, oh, can you help people, change their habits? And I was like, yeah, and I was like, but do you want to quit? And he was like, part of me wants to quit, but part of me doesn't. And so that's a lot of what I do, is ironing out and getting clear on those parts that are in conflict, because they're always trying to keep us safe or do something beneficial for us. Even self-sabotage. The parts of us that are sabotaging us, they all think they're helping us. And so when we can bring to the surface and into conscious awareness their goals and their desires, we can give someone a new strategy and align their subconscious parts. Or, Carl Jung calls it the shadow. And the shadow is those doubts and those fears and the parts of ourselves we reject. And and I think especially for men, like we repress that feeling of weakness, we repress the doubts, and what we repress ends up manifesting in physical symptoms and self-sabotage and things that then seem like they're out of our control. So when we can bring those to the surface, really with anybody, I think that's one of the main things I do is help people with those parts.
Well, and again, not to be preachy, but gentlemen, man, it's incumbent on us to be there not only for ourselves, but our family and our loved ones, to not look at getting on top of our mental wellness and mental health as a sign of weakness, man. It's just absolutely not. It's quite the opposite, man. So, I mean, I hope we can find ways to kind of get past the stigma. But I did have a question, man, about, hypnosis, because you started talking about hacking the brain and getting into people's brains. I mean, that's kind of it's kind of a scary thing and scary place. What kind of resistance do you get to kind of hypnosis? Oh, you're not going to have me clucking like a chicken. I mean, that kind of rudimentary understanding of hypnosis, and the resistance people might have to, man, you're not jumping into my fucking brain. I mean, how much resistance do you get to people who are just not willing to allow people to get into their skull?
So hypnosis really starts the moment hypnosis is mentioned. because it's such a powerful frame. So it's really like overcoming objections, Jeffrey. And I have a bunch of pre-framed kind of lines to set people up for success. And sometimes, a lot of times I'll say, I know what you're going to say. Everybody says I can't be hypnotized, right? They say that right before they go deep into trance. So I'll basically do a mind read on them and steal their objection from them. And I'll say, what they can expect to happen. And so that's one thing I do. The other thing I do is I say, most people think hypnosis is them losing control. But if you think about it now, how in control are you when your subconscious programs are driving your life?
Facts,
What
yeah.
I do is I give control back to people where their conscious mind can change their subconscious program. So hypnosis is a state of heightened focus and heightened control. And so that overcomes their objections. And then another thing I do is I say, who's great at being hypnotized? The most successful people. Because if you think about it, they can take an idea from their conscious mind and implant it into their into their subconscious. Whether they know they're doing it or not, that's another thing. But successful people are always great hypnotic subjects. And so everybody goes, well, I want to be successful. I'm successful. I'm a great subject. And so I'm setting them up for success with just a few lines like that.
I like that. Hypnosis starts the moment I mentioned hypnosis, which I totally understand that. Patrick, you say you've worked with Nicholas on multiple occasions. What's been some of your experience and things you're willing to speak on that you've noticed how his techniques and some of his protocols have assisted you?
Yeah, I mean, the ones that I remember best are quantum timeline, basically being able to go back and observe moments in my childhood that were very impactful, traumatic situations that I was able to go backwards through my life and get to that point, relive that point, then go back forward through my life, experience how I acted and reacted based on a lot of the trauma and feelings that I had, and how my subconscious was basically, like Nick says, running my life. And once I got back to that point, then going back through again, past that point, back to my birth, then over to my father's birth, living his life, some of the trauma he went through all the way up to that moment, and then going backwards through my father's life, all the way back over to my life, and going through all of that, stopping there momentarily. And it totally changed my viewpoint of that moment, because when I got back to the present day at that time during the hypnosis session, Nick asked me what he felt, and I didn't feel anything at that point. I saw a huge vision of like a lion, like a male lion's face with the mane. And he goes, "What does that represent?" And I said, "Strength and knowledge." And so he said, "Okay, now as that lion, strength and knowledge, go back through your life and experience everything and how you would handle all of that as that, I guess, that lion with that strength and courage and knowledge and all these things." And once we got back to that point between my father and I, he said, "Now, how do you feel about, for instance, your father?" I said, "I feel compassion." So it totally changed everything, how I viewed, all of the experiences, and then able to come back to, the present day again and come out of that. I remember that one, pretty well. And then being able to advise myself in another one, all the different parts of me as the coach, as the kid that I was, all these different things. How would I either, coach or encourage, or what advice would I give present day Pat as all those different parts of me? And what you come away with is really every part of you wants you to be successful, wants you to succeed, and wants you to have a good life. But those suppressed parts that were injured, don't know how to do that and keep kind of pulling you back into the mud, so to speak. Right. So it's and there's been more, of course, but those are two that I actually remember. And I mean, I tell people I was absolutely against and terrified of getting hypnotized just because, lack of knowledge of it.
Yeah.
But ultimately I trusted Nick because I've known him for so many years. And I would advise anybody out there, number one, if you're suffering from just anxiety and depression that you just cannot figure out. I can tell you right now, methylene blue reset my nervous system in very short order, and that calmed me down enough to be able to go through the hypnosis, be able to do the other work that I've done to, alleviate a lot of those problems, right, and those issues. So it's amazing, actually.
Yeah, I actually just went on a deep dive like literally 2 nights ago, and I kind of went off about it yesterday to you, Pat. The whole methylene process, I was pretty ignorant about it, but we will need to get into it. But people look that up. If you're into fitness, health, and wellness, if you're eating right, and especially if you're taking supplements, understand the methylene process, and if you have the proper components in your body to have the right to have an optimal methylene process, because you're not absorbing the stuff you're taking in your body. Anyway, I could be wrong on that. But.
No, and there's different qualities of methylene blue,
right,
and different delivery systems, substances that are mixed with it. And so there's industrial level, which is not recommended, and then there's high grade, which is what I use. So just so people are aware.
Without a shadow of a doubt, man. I hope this conversation was useful to folks who were listening, and obviously we could go on, kind of forever telling our own stories of this and that. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, like Nick was saying, it really comes down to mindset. And to summarize it, Nick, what should we glean from this? What are the lessons?
Let me shed some light on what Pat shared.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
It's not that I, take him through trauma to re-experience trauma. It's that we can change the meaning of it, because in a moment of trauma, or I don't really use the word trauma personally, but in a moment of heightened emotion, it's almost like the nervous system and the subconscious mind, which may be the same thing. It's almost like they open up and they're trying to make meaning of it. And so those meanings can go deep into the system to an identity level. Someone who gets abused or raped or molested may make a meaning of, I'm dirty, I'm not good enough, the world is dangerous. And so that meaning shapes their entire way of moving through the world until you get someone who's skilled enough to go in and change the meaning. And so that's really what we do. And working with Pat, like Pat's a world champ. He's a Hall of Famer, and he's trained so many world champs and incredible fighters. And he's a great leader. So he's got within him an incredible amount of resources to tap into. And so this is what I believe for all of us. Everyone has, from their own life experiences, a deep well of resources to tap into to get, like I mentioned earlier, an equal and opposite result in the positive direction.
Yes. So
someone that's sabotaging themselves has this incredible ability to know exactly when to ruin things. And so they can then shift that to know exactly when to accelerate things, know exactly when to find success once that part of them is kind of reconditioned and reprogrammed. So it's just a belief that we all have the resources for joy and gratitude and success and accomplishment and learning. It's just whether our beliefs are lined up.
And when you talk about the self-sabotage and some of these behaviors, it isn't necessarily you're consciously doing this to yourself. This is your unconscious that engages in this self-sabotage when consciously, no, I want the best for myself. When in fact, there's this little monster, this little shadow beast underneath your unconscious that engages in this kind of self-sabotage and takes you off your square.
It's exclusively the subconscious. And sometimes we're aware of it, and sometimes we're not. Like Pat and I were doing a business workshop last week, and there was a gentleman there who had made a decision at a young age that selling was the worst thing ever because his mother had bought a vacuum from a traveling salesman, and the father came home and ripped apart the house because he was so mad at her. And so he made this unconscious meaning that selling is bad. So we had to bring that to the surface and reprogram it. And then it came out later that he believed that it was okay to trade things. Like he had traded his car, or he had traded a car for his services. And I said, okay, well, from now on, I don't want you to sell anything. I just want you to trade your services for money. And so it's that little redefinition gave him a new belief and a new frame of that could tap into the resources that were there, because he had this deep unconscious resistance that would give him forgetfulness, that would give him a brain fog, that were all these symptoms, physical symptoms would come up from that belief that selling was bad. And so, yeah, like you mentioned, it's the subconscious mind, it's unconscious processes that we need to bring to the surface and to make new meanings about.
And it's absolutely doable.
Oh, I mean, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we do it all the time. It's, whether somebody wants to change or not, that's another question. And sometimes it takes some sessions to figure out what the real root cause is. But absolutely, these can 100% change.
And I just want to add that, I think it's important for people to understand too, is that, for me, through my experiences in adulthood, how I acted and reacted, that, I was able, the parts of me that was the professional fighter, the coach, the broadcaster, all those types of things, that I could be in front of the cameras, I could fight in front of huge crowds, I could do all these things. But as time went on, I got to the point where I didn't even want to leave my house to go grocery shopping. That's how little I wanted to be out in public. And that was fear. And that's the way I had been living for years, was projecting fear. And that affected my relationships a great deal, which ended up being a situation where a home environment that's just not good. It's not a safe place to be. Out in the chaos of the world, all the traveling, everything else I was doing, I would come home to a place that I didn't feel safe at. And so through all of the things that transpired in my life and working with Will and working with Nick and all that, that I was actually in then a safe environment where at the time I needed to be. And that was super important, that I could be out on the farm in nature, working with animals, working with plants, having my hands in the soil and doing those sort of things that, really, really helped a lot. And Mariah, obviously, is a huge part of all this.
Shout outs to Mariah. Well, and I think, again, I'm sorry, go ahead, Nick.
Well, I was just going to say, I think Pat touched on an important point, that physical health and spending time in nature cannot be there's no substitution for that for mental health. Like, our ability to see the sunrise and the sunset turns on our dopamine and melatonin and serotonin, and our ability to view an open vista from a high point relaxes the nervous system, whereas sitting in a cubicle confines it and stresses it. And I've gone through a health challenge the last few years, and not having the building blocks in your body, the right minerals and nutrients, there's no way, like, none of my tools worked for me for a while because I didn't have what I needed to have to build health. So if you're not taking care of your physique, if you're not spending time in nature, and if you're not getting the essential nutrients and minerals, you might as well kiss your mental health goodbye. And there might be no subconscious beliefs behind that, just purely physiological, natural processes that aren't being fulfilled.
Well, and getting back to that nutrient deficiency, that is tied in inextricably to that methylene process. So check that out. So again, ladies and gentlemen, and particularly gentlemen, those of you out here who think that you're stuck, you're not. If you can holler at Nick, give us a little contact. Where can we track you down? And if people want to mess with you, man.
I do a weekly call at the Ministry of the Mind with my partner, and every week there's a different process. I'm taking people through a storytelling training right now where they learn the structure of stories and then they write their own story and we embed it into their subconscious mind. I've got a course on values in there. I've got a course on changing the identity. So every week we're doing calls like that, and we're just building up this library of resources. That's a super low monthly rate. So you can check that out at ministryofthemind.org. And then I'll have some live events and retreats and trainings coming up as well. And Jeffrey, I have one more point for the men out there.
Go for it, brother. Right. Go for it. Yes.
So our women, or women in general, reflect back to us what we're projecting. So if we're in a good, and this can add to our problems or it can take them away. So if you're in a positive state, if you're pursuing your purpose, if you're living your authentic truth, women are going to feel safe around you, and they're going to be attracted to you, and they're going to reflect that back to you. But if you're in a state of fear, if you're in a state of indecisiveness, if you're living for pleasures in the moment instead of your long-term vision, women won't feel safe with you. They'll probably emasculate you, and they'll constantly challenge you because they want to feel your strength and they want to feel you rise to the occasion. So if you're having issues with your woman, it's usually not them. It's usually something within us that they're reflecting back to us. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, man. If you're dating a female great white, be her counter male great white. Don't be a baby seal, man. Don't be her food.
So true. It's so true.
Don't let her simp you out. They like doing that. But anyway, Nick, man, I love you, brother, and I can't thank you enough, man. I think we should have more of these kind of conversations every few months down the line. I mean, just because, just check up on each other, man. Make sure we're doing good. Make sure everybody's head's doing well. But I hope, like I said, I hope people got some value from this. We can. I will add the link to where you can find Nick in the description of the video. Champ, any final words, brother?
No, I'm good. I think it was a great conversation. I appreciate you, Jeff, taking the time, and Nick. Always appreciate his time. So off to the races we go. Everybody out there, do your best to go after your weaknesses. That's all I can say is attack your weaknesses and become the man you're supposed to be.
Absolutely. You are the captain of your ship. Your time is now. Peace and so much love, guys. Take care of yourselves. You know what it is. There will always be more. Later, guys.